Severance. Okay. My eyes are going everywhere at once. Okay, so now we go recording it. We might as well go ahead and have get started. So, welcome to the work and laughs never end. Looking at the use of horror and humor in the Apple Plus TV series Severance, which will hopefully be coming back with its second season too, since or soon, because it had a really good cliffhanger. Oh, two more people. Okay.
Really good, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was
Do you
production
do you
was
know
already
at all
in.
when it might do you know when it might come back? Is it
Well, now that both strikes are resolved, hopefully soon. Although I haven't heard exactly or seen anything about exactly when they're going to start uh, back to filming. I know some things are going back to shooting right away, and others are going to wait till the holidays are done, which would be about a month from now. So,
Yeah.
although once it's done, we won't have to wait as long, because one of the nice things about Severance is, yeah, it's a science fiction horror comedy series, but it isn't really heavy on the digital effects. So, there's the budget can be kept is probably much more reasonable and easier to do than, say, like a TV series like The Foundation, or one of the MCU series like Loki season 2, or
Mhm.
Walking Dead. This is more of a, kind of, you know, straightforward, simpler series where you don't need all the special effects. To it, or all the makeup, or all the other things that can really drag down production schedule. It also will help with keeping Severance on the air, because it probably doesn't cost as much. This year, the viewer demands aren't going to be quite as high as, say, of some of other Apple's Plus's high concept series.
But
This.
that's one thing that is striking, I think, about Severance, that because you're mentioning the budget, I mean, when you said that, I realized that the sets, one of the things that makes it so disturbing is or horror um
Mm,
is the repetitiveness of the sets, right? Because you keep
yeah.
seeing the same halls, and
Yeah.
also an elevator that can, because everybody has portals in their movies and everything, but here's just an elevator, but it's
Yeah.
it's
It's
so,
a
Yeah.
I mean, it's so magical almost, right?
The
And all
sort
they
of
have to do is
generic 50s minimalism, right? And like
Mhm.
Art Deco design. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very Twilight Zone.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's literally endless. It kind of picks up on a couple of popular themes in horror, especially like some of the online horror stories. Like there's a creepy pasta, which is a name for stories that are cut and paste and put together online. They're intended to be heard, so they're usually like cut and pasted and are read by people. But one of the more famous ones is called the No End House, where you go into a house on a bet or to try to get money, and you end up trapped inside there, because the rooms are literally endless. It's kind of like, a tesseract, or some place where there's no end to the rooms that you can go through. And even
It's
when
kind of
you
like
get
a maze.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and even when you do think you get out, you still might not be out.
Mhm.
And there's
Yeah.
another one that's kind of like takes its basis from kind of internet legend. It's called the Back Rooms, where it's just kind of like endless halls, endless rooms that you can just get lost in and wander in forever. It's kind of like the back rooms of the internet, where it just goes on forever. And so those halls and the Lumen Corporation are just like endless. You don't know where it ends. half of them don't even have any doors in them. So you're wondering, why is this place so big? Where is it? And of course, some of the humor comes from they're in this place that has all this space. And usually businesses try to kind of maximize the amount of space they have. But one of the funny things here is in Lumen Corporation, you have our four main characters, Mark, Helly, Dylan, and Irving, in this huge room. And they're the only ones there. You know, there's nobody else there. It's just this gigantic room with with 4 computers there that are rather old for this being a huge,
Yeah.
modern business, and use ridiculously primitive graphics. And
And you'd think they would have at least
they're all
offices, not
packed
these
together in
little.
the middle of that room, right? In those little
yeah,
cubicles, those lame
The idea
cubicles.
of
yeah,
the
which
cubicle that keeps people together, but
yeah,
somewhat separate, but you never escape each other because
yeah.
you're.
I also can't help but kind of think of the maze. Another kind of callback to something kind of satirical is Scooby-Doo of going
Oh,
back
yeah.
and forth into those rooms,
oh
just in and
yeah,
out, in
yeah,
and out, in and out.
yeah. Then that would
Right.
also, yeah, don't they play cheesy like Muzak and a lot in
Yeah.
the, at least in the elevator? That would could almost be like a callback to Scooby-Doo too. Although it, of course, that's more just a reflection of the old Muzak that you would hear in the elevator, or
Mhm.
when you got put on hold waiting to talk to somebody at a credit card company or something like that,
Can I share a little anecdote about the Muzak thing? It was
Oh,
the weirdest thing that happened to me this semester was that in a classroom where I have one of my classes at 10 o'clock. This particular classroom, when I turned the computer, some music would come on, and my students thought that I was putting it on purpose, but I thought that it was from the next room. So, but at some point, I started checking where it was coming from because it was every class, and it was just eerie, kind of calming, kind of something music, but weird, and it made me feel. I started feeling uncomfortable with it, so I started talking to the students about it, and we started laughing because everybody thought somebody else was putting it on, and finally I had to investigate, and I went around. It was kind of playing, but mostly in the room. So I'm like, well, who's doing this to us? So we started freaking out. And I think the explanation finally was that, in fact, it was in our English department office, and the
oh,
secretaries were putting it on, and somehow it was connected to the computer in our classroom.
Wow,
the
that's
fan,
weird.
So it was a mystery this semester, and I think it's been
yeah,
solved. It,
As
the
calming as
fan.
it's supposed to be, ended up becoming more of something that was very
Yeah.
eerily
yeah, it
scary.
became the topic of
Okay.
conversation in class. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
phantom
yeah.
music. Yeah.
Sylvia, you play music, right? I thought that was very calming, right? Like I
Yes.
felt very relaxed when I was listening to this music.
Yeah, so I kind of incorporate that. I don't know now. I'm gonna have to
Uh,
rethink that a little.
well, it didn't
It
seem
depends.
disturbing, right?
If I chose music, I would not choose that. And sometimes I play music, for example, in my British literature, I play some medieval songs and other things like that. And sometimes I leave it on the whole class. But, I like to pick something that has some meaning. But this was just so eerie because,
Well,
it
well,
just
just
came
on a
out of nowhere,
this is
and
this
it
is on a
was,
this is
yeah.
on a side note unrelated to Severance, but when you mentioned medieval music, there's a couple of YouTube channels where uh, a band will take contemporary music, like say AC/DC or Ozzy Osbourne
Oh,
or
and make
something like
it to
that,
medieval.
and yeah, put it to medieval instruments.
I think I've heard some of those. Yes. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
those are actually pretty good.
Check it
Um,
out.
yeah, this endless maze of places, and then of course one thing that really is a nightmare for people that work but also humorous, is that the 4 of them are doing a job and they have no idea what it is. It's macro data retention or something like that.
Yeah.
How can you
And
retain how can you retain macro data? It's recorded in the
Well, it's
computer
refinement,
anyway.
refinement.
And it's
Yeah,
Oh,
coded, so
macro
they
data
don't know what it
refinement.
means.
Yeah,
I like that each of them speculates what it may be. So each of them imagines something that those numbers represent that they have to get rid of. So everybody has their own little narrative in their mind, what they're doing with them.
yeah.
But
If anything, if they do anything with them,
yeah,
I mean, because they're just never sure exactly what they're doing there. I love when one of them finishes their assigned task. They get this corny music video, not music video, but this corny cartoon video with these god awful graphics that look like they're from the old early 80s personal computer
Mhm.
thing, the old asteroid space
Early
invaders type
Nintendo,
thing.
sure.
And the founder says, "Yes, you have completed your task. Now I must leave." And he turns into an eagle and leaves, and you're wondering, what the hell did they just accomplish? And that's your reward? A thank you with a really bad graphics. Oh, and if you're lucky, you get a waffle party.
Yeah.
but this kind of connects to the concept of alienation that was circulating, with modernism and
Mm,
industrialization and everything. There was like rapid growth of cities and technology, and the
mm,
idea was that if you reduce the task to something very small and repetitive, you're just completely disconnected from the purpose of what you're doing. So like if you think of factory work where you just put a shoe on like a revolving thing, right? You put a shoe there all the time, and then you just don't even have a concept of what the shoe is for, or
yeah.
what, you're just alienated from your work. And that's supposed to be a way to keep people in their place, because they will not have a larger picture, so they can't
Yeah.
really protest anything because they don't know what it's connected to. So like keep
And there's no
people in a small section of the
And they don't know the
machine.
product. Right,
Yeah, and they
I
don't
mean,
know
right,
even.
like in the last couple of months, right, there was that story about the chocolate cultivators who had never tasted chocolate, or people who make iPhones who have never used a smartphone before. Right? I mean, it's deeply depressing, right? I mean, that idea of alienation of workers from their labor, right, and the fact that they don't even know what they're constructing. Yeah,
Yeah,
of
there's
course it's
something
also
fundamentally
yeah,
absurd
because
about that. It's very real, right? It's
yeah.
not a television show. Right?
And
Yeah.
building on what Liana said, you have no idea what you're working on, but this also is a way to control the workers. You don't know how good a job you've done, how you compare to others, so there's no real chance for promotion because you don't know how you're doing compared to others. And if you apply for a promotion, they can decide yes or no, and you'll never know if they
yeah,
gave you a fair shot or not. And of course, there's a lot of humor in here. Now, of course, the concept of the series, in case some of the folks attending have never heard of Severance. So basically, the concept
yeah.
is that uh, there's a process called literally severance, where a new personality is created for you, one that's strictly for work, called your innie. And once you go home for the night, you're supposed to be restored to your original personality, your outie, in essence. And so, every time you come into work, you always get switched back to the innie, whereas, and then you leave, you're gone to the outie. And one of our main characters, Mark, played brilliantly by Adam Scott, was a college professor whose wife tragically died. So, in order to forget about her and try to, you know, find a way to deal with it, he goes to work for the Lumen Corporation and has an innie created for himself. So, when he's at work, he doesn't remember that he lost his wife. So and it's a very sneaky way also to appeal to people, that are grief stricken, taking advantage of their grief. We can help you forget. But of
Or
course,
maybe that grief is created for them because, well, the wife may or may not be dead. So, you know,
yeah.
there's a mystery there. And
I was gonna,
so
I
you
was gonna
wonder
say,
why.
I was gonna ask. Let's avoid spoilers, but that's
Okay.
too late.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there will be some spoilers, I
Yeah.
guess, but
At least
hopefully
we.
it will make it more mysterious and
Yeah.
people will be more curious to see it if
Yeah, because
they hear a few.
there's a lot of unresolved mysteries
Mhm.
here, and of course the name Helly, for example, the new female worker that joins the group of three, one guy retired. Of course, the connection there is hell, essentially. Like you're literally in hell in this workplace environment. It of course it has a Y at the end, but that's a nice way to kind of distinguish it from being too obvious about what exactly is going on. Um,
But
I
I
guess we
mean,
can
and
also
you
say
could
that there
think
is
that
a, oh,
Mark.
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was
No,
also
go
gonna
ahead,
say
Sylvia.
that I guess we can say that there is a sense of duality among them. Within
Yeah.
the characters that we have Mark, who is trying to avoid his grief. So he severs himself and allows his work self be separated. So I guess
Yeah.
that is the moment that he's allowed to not grieve. And then we have the innie and the outie. And we can say, at least without giving entirely spoilers, is that there's going to be a sense of duality as well with the other characters, that there's
Yeah.
going to be a complete stark contrast between the innies and outies and how they're experiencing the workforce.
Well, and there's more than and of course there's always going to be there's a lot of hidden secrets, even more than just double that. I mean, there's all kinds of questions about what's going on, how
But
deeply they're sinking their claws into people, how easy it is to control folks. Do they really cease their control when you get outside? Yeah, it seems
I was
quite
just gonna
likely.
I was going to add, in relation to Sylvia's point, that duality is ultimately shown to be impossible to maintain, right?
Yeah,
And in fact, right, it's a schizoid break, right? And
yeah,
it's they're also making fun of this fantasy that a lot of people in the Western industrialized world have. Like, here's my real life, my life outside of work, and then there's my life at work, and like this constant desire to escape, to be distracted, to not have to think
yeah,
about it, right? And also the kind of work mentality that says, right, you have to just focus on work and everything about work and everything's about efficiency when you're there.
yeah,
And neither place is really a tenable place to live, but yet those are the lives that
yeah,
all of us have in modern society,
I
right?
mean,
And
one,
we're expected to have that kind of movement, right, from our real lives, right, to our work
Mhm.
lives and then back
yeah.
again. But the
well, the
fantasy that you can escape it is what Severance is promising, and of course, it's a lie, right? It's an
Yeah.
illusion.
well, what you're talking about reminded me, one of the more sinister aspects of that, and this idea that the perfect worker is a worker that doesn't have emotions and doesn't have a life.
Yeah.
You know, when the 9/11 attack happened, one thing that was the most shocking
Yeah.
to me was that when the first tower was hit, in the second tower, people went to look out the window to see what was happening, and they were told to go back to work, to not look. This was to me,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
this was
Don't
one
look
of
out
the
the
things that
window.
shocked me the most because nothing's happening. Go back to work, go back to your numbers and put them in the boxes. Like it's
Okay.
the detachment from your life is actually a necessity sometimes because otherwise you're not efficient. If you have emotions,
Yeah.
if you have thoughts
Yeah.
of your own, so the perfect worker is a robot. That's why, people are afraid they will be replaced with robots at
Well,
work when AI takes
They'd be
over,
much more
supposedly, right?
efficient
But
than human beings. Yeah.
ironically too, the whole concept of the innie and outie almost normalizes what we would call insanity.
Yeah.
Because usually
yeah,
dissociative identity
schizophrenic.
disorder, yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
dissociative identity disorder usually is considered to be insanity. But now the Lumen Corporation makes a split personality the new normal, I guess, at least for them. So
And I
you
think
can
it's
really,
interesting that I'm so sorry that split personality idea, the fact that you have one persona at work and one persona at home, but
yeah,
technically we do that. on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Majority tend to. We have our work persona, which we
Yeah.
seem to, highlight certain things. Like, for example, we're a bit more approachable, maybe more affable. And then when we go to work,
More
it's like
censored. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, definitely, right.
Yeah,
And when you're home,
Right.
it's a completely different personality, different
Yeah.
persona. I know some of us are even introverts that once we get home, the kind of smile goes off and it's like, okay, now it's time to recharge.
yeah, yeah.
And
We
I think
don't.
Yeah.
we like to
I'm like
compartmentalize,
that
right?
for
I mean,
sure.
this
Yeah.
is it's also the show is about the danger of compartmentalizing too much, that
Yeah,
in the end you end up denying things or repressing things about yourself because they're not acceptable in the workplace or something like that. And in
Yeah.
the end, I mean, this is a Freudian theory, goes back to the 20th century, and the idea that the repressed will always come back. And I was just thinking of how Irv, right? Just
Oh
give
yeah.
a little spoiler. He at
Oh.
home he paints this painting with black paint, and at some point at work, he has a hallucination of black paint coming onto his computer, which is, it's basically the repress. They will start kind of
Ghibli.
seeping into each other, those
Yeah.
two personalities, because the more we try to repress, the more, that's what Freud said, that the more it's going to turn into a symptom, and it's
I
going
really
to
love that scene in
bother
relation
us.
to Liana saying, like, I love that scene with Mark and his wife, right? Where they recognize they have a connection, right, within that space, right? That sort of unreal purgatorial space, but they're still separated from one another, right? Like, but I thought that was really powerful, right? We watched that episode again yesterday, and it just struck me, right? That's something that the show touches on. But yeah, you can't. How are you going to get over? How do you escape from the grief you have about the loss of
Yeah,
people that you've loved, right? Or even the loss of a relationship that you had.
yeah,
You can't
exactly.
escape it, right? And yet
Yeah.
everybody still wants to try, right?
Of
And
course,
there's a
and
danger to push back the trauma and not address it, not
yeah,
confront it. That's
Yeah.
the
and if you
problem that we all
Yeah.
and if you suppress
psychologically
it,
have.
it actually makes things worse.
Yeah.
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 And of
And
course, the very name Lumen Industries, like lumination, the light, the light,
right.
something
Yeah,
that
it's
gives off light,
contrast.
Yeah.
Like everything is
illumination,
light, bright,
Right.
light,
gaining
white
knowledge,
light.
but the Lumen Corporation Industries is all about keeping people in the dark. So it's got that nice double meaning with the name inherent in it.
And also there's the religious kind of metaphorics of the use of light, and even that scene you were referring to earlier, David, like with the the pixelated, the early video game art, right? One of the
Yes.
funniest parts of that is that, like, after he congratulates the player, he says, I love you. Right. And then he flies away, right? Like, and this notion, right, that somehow this
Yeah.
completely impersonal corporation, right, cares and actually loves the worker, right? It's just so ridiculous, right? But it's a great cap, right, to the end of the series, and the sort of absurdity of the propaganda they're being fed within this workspace, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the human resources, isn't it the human resources department where uh, Christopher Walken's character Bert works?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
He's the
which
one who
is like,
makes the pictures, the images.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's virtually they have nothing to do with human resources. I mean, they don't recruit anything. They're like working in a lab, preserving paintings about the founder. And of course, there's the whole idea that the founder is almost like this godlike figure,
Yeah.
Pierre Egan,
Prophet.
he's, I
Yeah.
read a review yesterday that suggested that Pierre Egan was inspired by L. Ron Hubbard and, Scientology and so
Sure.
forth.
Or
Oh, I can
Joseph
see
Smith,
that.
for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because
Yeah.
it is, and it is in a lot of ways a cult. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't escape, and if they catch you doing something wrong, they take you into the break room. Now, at a normal job, a break room is where, like you go to have lunch, you take a break for 10 minutes, have some coffee or something. But in this case, the break room is a room where they take you and chain you down and basically force you to watch stuff and torture you until you break. So it literally becomes a break room, but not in the way that you'd like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the elevator, God only knows where that goes,
But well, just to finish with this idea, the duality, um, I just yesterday when we were rewatching an episode, I noticed, when Mark's Innie actually ends up in his sister's house, his sister has a hard time recognizing him. I mean, it's the same person, same exact person, but she has a hard time saying that that's her brother. So she keeps referring to the Audi as him instead of you, and then she keeps correcting, like instead of saying to this person, you are doing this or you did this, she says he, and as opposed to this person that she doesn't recognize. And it's the idea that if our family walked into our workplace, would they recognize us? I mean, and it's kind of a feeling of guilt that it's almost like you're putting on an act and you feel guilty about it in a way. But then which one is the real you? The one that makes an effort, or the one that just gives up on trying to do anything, except be, which is what we do when we relax, right? We just whatever.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder if the whole thing of when you mentioned the sister doing him and you, I can't help but wonder if the creators of the show were kind of poking a little fun at all the, a portion of our society being concerned with gender pronouns, and him and her aren't acceptable. Some folks want to be referred to as they or them or etc. So sometimes you have no idea what should we refer to a person as.
Well, 50 cents, 50 cents, I need to say it correctly, right? Or cent, 50 cent. He decided that he's an it. So now he wants to be referred to as the thing and it. But
Is that
I
right?
think this is all just to make fun of it, of
Yeah.
what's going
Well,
on.
he should then recruit a cousin of his so he can have a cousinette. Like from the Addams family.
Oh,
Right. It's an Addams Family reference.
Yeah.
Liana didn't see the original. Yeah.
Or for more recent.
but I know what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
If
thing.
you've watched Wednesday on Netflix, I don't know if Cousin It appears on there, but that would be, if you're wondering what the Addams Family is, and you can see a modern kind of revival of it in Netflix series Wednesday. So, yeah, and of course, it's true that they try to repress the Audi, and yet the people are still human. You can't make them robotic. They want to break free. They want to form connections to each other. Even the innies want to form a connection to someone, kind of like Mark and Helly starting to have, or touching on a relationship. Irving and Bert basically kind of starting to develop a romance between the two of them. It's kind of like in the original Jurassic Park when Sam Neill's paleontologist, or that Jeff Bloom's Life Will Find a Way. That
Which
you
is
can
in a lot of dystopian movies and books. You always see like the perfect society starts to break when people start having feelings, right? That's kind of a trope that has been around for a while. But for example, I was, thinking of a comparison to, for example, 1984 or
Yes.
Brazil. And this show is, the difference is that it starts as comedy, right? I mean, we were talking about comedy versus horror, but it starts as almost like, haha, look at that, how silly everything is, how,
How
they
absurd.
have
Yeah.
their waffle
Yeah.
parties, And then it turns
Mhm.
into more and more kind of
That's really
gripping,
dark. Yeah.
Yeah.
dark,
Yeah.
suspenseful show. But the difference between that and, let's say, 1984 is that the entity, that the surveillance entity, is not, I mean, it doesn't become scary until much later, right? So that's why it's like all of it is a comic relief until the comedy is gone. It kind of,
Yeah.
the last episode tells almost nothing funny about it. All of it is kind of
Yeah.
suspenseful and scary.
Mm.
So Robin and I were talking a little bit. It made me think of, I don't know if you're familiar with Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault. He was kind of a theorist that talked about how people are kept in place, how are they disciplined?
Mhm.
And the most effective way is not the scary totalitarian kind of type of society that you see
1984
in
type society.
1984.
Yeah.
It's more, the better way to control people is to to give them a little, to make them feel content, and then they just accept authority,
And then they
because
internalize the authority.
they
Yeah.
internalize it. Yeah. So this is more the on the side of, which is the consumer society, is the one where people are just kept content enough to not rebel, to not, and also in the dark enough to not know what what they're contributing to, what their part in the system is. And in fact, we're
Yeah.
all part of, we are actually contributing actively to things like child labor, for example, with the things we buy, or things that we don't want to know about, because it's all like compartmentalized, and we compartmentalize everything, including how our products come to us.
Yeah.
So that's a society of control that is through entertainment and consumerism. So this is
And
maybe the
And you're given
what they're
little
trying.
distractions and little raises, right?
Yeah.
And little
Mhm.
pats on
Yeah.
the back, and a clock when you retire, right? And a watch for your 10th anniversary. And all of it, right, is
I
not
did get a
adequate
clock on
for
my.
your trading your life, right? For your work, right? But
And it's kind of ironic too, that I was just thinking that if the Lumen Corporation had actually like done a normal business, when you were saying the reward and interaction within work, if they actually had people together, they might find it easier to actually keep control of them. If all the departments were within reach of each other, the innies would feel more of a human connection, and that would make it easier to control them, because they would have that connection. But they're so isolated that the four of them are naturally wanting to start to ask questions and want to be free of the control. Whereas if they were all kind of in a normal environment, establishing and keeping that control might actually be a lot easier. So it's like the Lumen Corporation, in a lot of ways, almost undoes itself in the process. And it's also, think of that, you can't suppress something that causes so much as powerful as grief for an extended period of time. It's just not possible. When you've lost someone as close to you as a significant other or a parent, you can't suppress it, or you can try, but it'll keep on coming out. You can try, but it'll end up affecting you in a lot of times inside, just because the emotions are so powerful that you just can't keep them suppressed forever. Although it might help with the grief in the sense that you find another purpose, that the energy you channel into the grief goes into trying to find a way to break free, which would kind of be ironic as well. Yeah, and again, it's amazing the number of levels this series works on. When
Yeah.
Kelly tries to and kind of when it starts to get serious to me was when Helly tried to kill herself and very nearly succeeded. That was kind of like a point where the series really started to kind of get a lot darker. Because you could see that it didn't, and you kind of wonder if this is deliberate, because of course the revelation at the end is that Helly is there for a reason that she doesn't even begin to suspect. And so you kind of wonder if the corporation deliberately left Helly's reprogramming incomplete, so they would have more drama that way.
I thought it was interesting how before she attempts to commit suicide, it's almost presented in a comical way of how she is trying to communicate with her outie. It's almost like, silly you, you're trying to go ahead and communicate with her, silly you, you're going to eat this little pen cap, with a hidden message, silly you, you're going to write, a message to yourself on your body, and it was taken very lightly, of the fact that it almost seems like we was building up to that. It was surely going to build up to the fact that Helly was going to commit suicide. She was miserable. Something was going to trigger her, and she was going to find a way out. Whether she could get out, then she would get out another way, right?
Yeah.
But it was actually presented that way. And when I rewatched those particular episodes, I could see that, yes, it was, no, the machine can tell the messages on your body. Did I tell you that we can also see it inside your body? That we can also retrieve it from your body?
Yeah, that takes Big Brother from 1984 to a whole new level.
Yeah.
But of course, the revelations in the last episode can make you wonder, was all of this a setup? Is everything that happened within the series something that was set up deliberately?
I never
Even
thought
their
of
re-
that, but I
even
guess
their
it's a theory, yeah.
even their rebellion, was their rebellion programmed to take place essentially by introducing Helly into this group, and she kind of disturbs their universe? To paraphrase a poem by T.S. Eliot, of course, the love song of J.O. for
Right
Proof
there.
Rock.
Do I
Yeah.
dare disturb the
Yeah, do I dare disturb the universe? And of course, it's also funny because all he's talking about is going up to a woman at a party and saying hello to her. And that's his equivalent of like, do I dare disturb the universe? It's like, dear God, man, all you're going to go up and is to say hello to a woman. You're not disturbing the entire cosmos, for heaven's sakes.
Well, in
Although,
that
in a way,
poem, I think the most ironic thing, just talking about humor versus things that are scary, at the end, he asks himself, do I dare eat a peach? Because sometimes the most important question turns out to be the one about your own body, what you can or can't do anymore. But
yeah,
so the irony is waiting too long until you can disturb the universe, because then all you disturb is your stomach. So,
of course,
but what I
sometime.
wanted to say is, I mean, Sylvia and I were talking a little bit about this, how it's a comedian that has created this series, and how a lot of comedians have a better sense of how to scare us, because they make us feel as if everything is safe, everything is funny, and suddenly it's not. And I mean, if you think
Yeah,
of Jim Carrey or other people who
Robert
have turned
Williams,
humor into, or
Will Ferrell, yeah.
yeah,
Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell,
Sure.
my Jordan Peele, who's
yes.
from Key and
Yes.
Peele,
Sure.
he turned more into horror, but the horror maintains, a little comic relief, comic element. So this, because it's always been the case that the line between comedy and tragedy has been a very fine line, which I was going to say Shakespeare knew, because he always
Yeah.
has comic relief in his tragedies, And in his comedies, they're all always a darker element. So he's been very good at combining tragedy and comedy.
Yeah.
And some of
But I think
his most successful plays arguably have been what are called the problem plays, which are sort of tragicomic mixtures, right? Like, you know, they go more into trying to have sort of a balanced perspective, right, on the nature of life, right? That it's a mixture of comedy and tragedy, right? Of celebration, right, and funerary rites,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And then of course everything goes to hell in a handbasket. But yeah, of course, if we look at like big moments in our lives, for example, looking back at the past, sometimes just saying hello can change everything. So tomorrow is my wife and I's 25th anniversary of meeting.
oh wow.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
we celebrate two
Congratulations.
anniversaries. You know, our wedding anniversary and then our anniversary of meeting. And I was just thinking that 25 years ago today would have been the first time I instant messaged her on instant messenger on AOL, and saying, "Have you read any good books?" And then, you know, she hadn't read anything in a while, so we ended up talking about music. And it's just thinking about how 25 years ago, just contacting somebody out of the blue ended up changing my life forever. For the good, obviously. And she's had to endure me for 25 long years and all my bad jokes. She needs to be nominated. Jocelyn needs to be nominated for sainthood. You know, that's. But you know, saying hello to somebody can literally disturb the universe that you're in and change it forever. But you know, sometimes, you know, a lot of times it can actually be really worth it in the long run, because you know you might have something fantastic and wonderful happen to you that's you know, turned into 25 years of you know, a fantastic life and relationship. But if I never would have said risk saying hello over online, you know, who knows where things would have gone. So yeah, you know,
Well,
sometimes you know, disturbing the universe is worth it.
I guess our life is made of moments that could have turned out otherwise if we hadn't made one little decision that
Mhm.
turns into a big decision, right? But
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, yeah, I think we're drifted off Severance here, but you know, just that putting heli into the environment starts a whole cascade of events, and when we see the final episode, we wonder, you know, was this deliberate? Has all of this been staged, or did Lumen come up with an idea and now it's escaped control from them?
I would love to place bets on what's going to happen.
Yeah,
That'd be a nice game.
yeah. Well,
But I do
that's
think
part
that
of the
it's
challenge too, because
Kelly.
we really don't know what's going to happen next.
But what
Yeah,
with Haley is what's interesting is that she is I mean, she's the newest there, but with her, we see the most like dramatized fight
mm,
between the innie and the outie. Like they're literally just almost fighting to the death. And whatever
yeah,
she does, the outie undoes, and the other way around. Like, I mean,
mm.
it's a fight between them. I guess that's one of the main plots that it's moving
But
toward. And I guess we'll have to see what comes of that because
but
it's not resolved.
but of course
That was a
the
great reveal for the conclusion, by the way, right?
yeah. But
That was a nice
Uh,
part of the conclusion, right? That
I
Heli
don't
but
want to say
realizes
what
she's
that
her
is,
own
but
greatest
yeah.
enemy.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that ending with Heli also raises the question of was that internal fight all staged? Was it all staged for dramatic purposes? Because of course, if Heli comes in and adjusts to the work environment fine, that's going to be pretty boring. So if you're going to do something which is done for a reason that nobody really knows, none of them really knows at the beginning, um, was it all in essence scripted by the company?
Well,
All that inner conflict.
I still am dubious about that. I mean, I would love to see. Yeah, I have, just because I haven't thought of it before, it doesn't mean that it's not a plausible scenario. But
Yeah.
I'd have to look at it again to see if there are clues for that being
It doesn't feel
something.
like it, right? Yeah, when we watch the
No,
conclusion again, you're right. Like she actually starts attacking the company right before she gets
yeah,
cut off, right? So if it was staged, that would be an impressive level of staging. But
yeah.
yeah, it'd be interesting.
But
Well,
maybe something backfired in something that was staged.
yeah,
Well, I guess we'll have to
And
see.
kind of the
yeah, they
evil
were
of
staged.
Helly's Audi, right, is very
Yeah,
obvious, right, in that video that she posts too, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, it
yeah,
could all be part of staging to fool everybody else, but like they focus a lot on how Helly is responding to her Audi, right? And how
yeah.
horrific that is. So yeah, I don't
But
know
I
if I
want to
agree with that
say
theory, but it's an interesting idea.
just
Yeah.
Yeah.
a note to the people who didn't see Severance, who haven't seen it yet. Just so, I mean, we kind of make allusions to some things that happen. We haven't really given you the actual uh, key to what's happening, but
Mhm.
just to keep in mind that it's only been a season. So if you want to catch up with all of that, it's only 9 episodes. It's
Yeah.
not so hard to catch up. It's not like already 7 seasons and you think, oh, it's daunting to
Yeah.
start from scratch. But you could, before the second season comes, you can very easily watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's not as daunting as say, so what do I have to watch to catch up on the MCU? Okay, well here, take these 35 movies, take these 10 TV series, and then, I'll see you in 2 years after you manage to watch everything.
Oh, hey, maybe
Yeah.
it's time to watch Game of Thrones. How much time should I put aside for for that?
Um, yeah, you'll probably be going for a while,
Your
but
whole break?
um, maybe just watch the TV series, because if you're going to wait for the 6th and 7th books, that could be end up becoming like Waiting for Godot. And for those of you who don't know the reference to that, Waiting for Godot is a famous play where somebody's in a park waiting for a guy named Godot to show up, and he never does. So it's
Yeah,
like
no,
I'm
I
kind of
actually thought of Waiting for Godot while watching Severance. In fact,
Oh,
I
sure,
was gonna make a
yeah,
connection between that and absurdist plays from the
that's right,
mid
yeah,
20th century,
mm,
because
right,
there's that idea of absurdity and that you're
yes,
waiting for an
mm,
explanation and you don't get it,
mm,
but
right, right. And
and
with
some of
But
it
it
is
Kafka,
funny.
with Kafka, right? You're seeking God, you're seeking meaning, and you're never gonna really get to it, right? Whereas right
yeah,
in this show, right, there's a mystery in terms of the meaning, but it's not. It doesn't seem like a divinely inspired mystery, right? You're not gonna gain
yeah.
any wisdom. You're
Well, we
just
don't
gaining
know
your
yet.
freedom, right? Yeah, right.
But
Yeah,
Godot is God in a way. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I
and
I
Godot,
remember
it's
talking about
God.
it in a
Yeah,
class, and that was like a
yeah,
yeah.
big
true.
explanation,
Yeah,
was that it's the idea of God that you don't quite
That's
get
right.
to, even if
yeah,
you have faith, but you
Or God never manifests in your life, right? And therefore you're always waiting to sort of feel God's I mean that's the sort of
yeah.
waiting for Godot perspective. Yeah.
And then if we like tied it back to religion, then it's like the old story of somebody asking God, where were you? And God saying, I was with you all along. You just didn't see me. Yeah,
like the
yeah,
footsteps on the beach that are
yeah,
Yeah.
Jesus.
yeah. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. That
That
that idea didn't
story.
work for Kafka, that's for sure. There was
Yeah,
no God walking alongside you in the labyrinth, right? Yeah.
yeah. I have to admit, I've never watched Waiting for Godot, and
Oh,
kind
really?
of the absurdist plays and so forth aren't
Uh-huh.
really my cup of tea too
Hmm.
much.
I
Yeah,
love them
it's
in
like,
college, like
Yeah.
Eugene
There's some Bertolt
Ionesco,
Brecht and
and
Severance and Ionescu.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's just like there's some like very famous canonical writers that I just never read and never will, like James Joyce and
Yeah.
so forth. But there,
well, his short stories are more accessible. I mean, if
yeah,
Sure.
they're always fun to talk about in class. I've been teaching some Joyce stories, but yeah, modernists really love this concept of absurdity and playing with between tragedy and comedy, like Severance does too.
Yeah, I
And the
don't know.
struggle to get to meaning, or find God,
Right.
or
I don't know if there's any connection between the two, but when we decided to do this, I went back and read a horror novel from the 1990s that is considered a very, very strange novel. It's called House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski.
oh
And
yeah, I
basically,
remember that one.
it has a family living in a house, and suddenly the house starts to develop new rooms, new closets, and eventually it like opens up into an entire dimension that can go on forever. And it's kind of like, and the writer Daniel Lusky kind of writes the book in a real weird way. So like when they're going into the caverns and they're getting further away, he on each page he kind of narrows the text down until it's like there's a few words in the middle
Oh
of
my
the
God, that's
page.
interesting.
And sometimes he'll have the words in a swirl if like somebody's going downstairs or something, or there's a few words on the page if a character's crawling from like this real small space. I
Did you
mean,
like it, David? Did you like that
uh,
book? I've never
yeah,
read it. I had
yeah,
a student who had it, and it looked really intriguing, and he showed it to me. But you liked
yeah.
it?
It's a good read. I mean, once you get to that point where the author starts messing with the page space,
Uh-huh.
of course it goes a lot quicker. When you have like one word a page. And it kind of, there's a whole bunch of footnotes where the person putting in the footnotes kind of goes off on this crazy story about his sexual conquests and everything. I think it's almost like a nod to kind of the cliche in horror movies where you have to, show a lot, show some skin and so forth to kind of satisfy the audience, except this time it's done in the footnotes. So when I was reading it, I eventually started ignoring those because it just was, I wanted to just keep up with the main narrative, then kind of listen to this guy's juvenile teenage conquest. But it's also the implication that telling the story of the book is affecting the editor mentally.
Oh wow. But
So
I
I
was gonna
mean,
say that what you made me think of is, I mean, maybe people are more familiar with Coraline and this idea of the
yes.
house that has an evil version of it. And I
Mhm.
think the house has been a fascinating like setting for a lot of horror writers and shows and movies, but I was thinking of the series, the miniseries that are all based on a house, like the Haunting of Hill House, and
Haunting of
then
Hill House,
Yes.
of course,
Mhm.
sure.
what's the second one? The Bly Manor, the Haunting of Bly
Yeah.
Manor, and then the third one is a house too, right? A House of Usher. Okay,
Yeah, the house
Yeah.
follow
that's the
house.
Mhm.
fourth one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, surprisingly, right? Even though that's so important in the story, right? They don't use the house as much other than a setting for that conversation, right on the finale. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, the fall of the House of Usher, and of course, it's ironic that all three are done by one person who knows classic horror very well, Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
Who,
mean, in a way, he also utilized Stephen King's The Shining, which revolved
yes,
around a house as well,
mhm,
and
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the remake role of Doctor
the
Sleep, right?
that's right. That's right.
yeah. Well, that was
Yeah,
that. Doctor Sleep was actually King's sequel to The
Oh, okay.
Shining. It was kind of his way of, I guess, taking back the character from Stanley Kubrick's movie version, which is the one that most people knew.
Hmm.
Yeah, he
And
has an unreasoned hatred of that movie. I don't get it.
it was primarily stems from that The Shining is a very personal novel to King because
Mhm.
it kind of Jack Torrance kind of reflects some of the problems that he was having
Sure.
with addiction at the time he was writing it.
Sure.
And, you know, although Stanley Kubrick's movie is brilliant, it sacrifices all the fascinating character aspects of Jack and Wendy Torrance. That's almost entirely absent from Kubrick's movie. It's still brilliant, but King
But
didn't like the way his characters were essentially sacrificed
Yeah.
by.
but I mean, so interesting that what you're saying is basically that the severance is happening whenever somebody writes an alter ego that through which they kind of maybe purge something bad in themselves. Like it's a way to a cathartic thing that you kind of leave behind that persona by putting it in the book. So it's a severance too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the innie and outies ever kind of merge together. And of course, since we already said that Mark's wife might actually be alive, will his
May or
innie
may not.
remember that she might be alive and look
She's been
into
sent to
that?
the underworld. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Where if she is alive, where the
Where are they
hell is she?
going?
Yeah. Was
Testing.
she part?
They're being sent to testing.
Well, and was she a part? If she's in fact not dead, was her death staged by the corporation? Has she worked for Lumen for a while? What
Is she the
exactly?
prototype? I was like, was she the
Sorry.
prototype?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a good question. Was she a trial run?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
it's very intriguing.
Yeah. If the whole
And
thing
we
is a
don't know
con
much
and it's a
about her,
setup,
but
that's an interesting idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we don't know how long have the four of them actually been there. They feel like they've been there forever, but have they actually been? Because how would you know if you go through the process? It's essentially brain control, mind control. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and that's another thing, of course, that Severance brilliantly builds on. It's a concept in horror of the loss of individuality, the loss of control of your identity,
Sure.
where you're no longer in control. Or sometimes you can even have an entirely different personality. If the four main characters, Mark, Haley, Dillian, and Irvin, could have been programmed a week ago. And they might, if the people input in the innie personality and said, you've been here for 10 years, they think they've been there 10 years.
That's true. I know that the Mark says that he's been there for 2 years, I believe.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
we don't know. I mean, there's also this I don't want to give away spoilers, but we know that there is discussion of that there's a possibility, right? That maybe it really wasn't 2 years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because
his family would know, but we don't. Yeah, if the innie could talk to the outie family, I mean,
But
anyway,
it makes you wonder, because then let's say he's been severed for 5 years, but if there's bad behavior, then I mean, we could always reset, possibly, right? And
yeah,
then now
that's
it's
a
been
possibility.
2 years.
Yeah, and
That's scary.
could Mark's entire life before he went to work for Lumen have been programmed? Could the outies actually be outie innies? Which sounds really weird. Is there an outie? Then I guess. I mean, how
A little bit like Matrix, right? That there's you don't know which one is the real
what's the real reality?
person. Yeah.
Or like Edgar Allan Poe says in the poem, is all life but a dream within a dream? Yeah.
Inception.
Inception. Yeah, the movie where it's just like you don't know what reality is. It's just which of course is something Mike Flanagan brilliantly captures in The Haunting of Hill House, where time and space and personality and knowledge of events is all just folded up into this uber powerful haunted house.
That is still the best miniseries he's done. I think that was genius, but the next ones are a little less brilliant. I mean, you want to see him capture the same magic of the first miniseries, but yeah,
Well,
but the other ones are interesting.
well, I was going to say something about Mike Flanagan, but that's something we can do next
Oh, we
time.
could
Next
have
time around
a
the
separate
Mike,
show
Sure.
for, I mean,
the Mike, the Mike
Yeah,
channel
Flanagan
for,
series.
yeah,
we
Yeah.
can do that. I would
Yeah,
like
Because
we've
that.
talked with Sylvia about it. Yeah, like Sylvia knows more about Mike Flanagan than I do.
oh yeah, well, I've been aware of Mike Flanagan for a long time. Even just after he started to hit it big, I was working on a project of reviewing all the horror films that had ever been after a certain date that had been done, and the people asking me to do a review asked me to watch Mike Flanagan's Oculus Chapter 3, The Man with the Plan. There weren't an Oculus Chapter 1 and 2, and I watched it and go, oh my God, this guy is a good director. This storytelling is just absolutely brilliant. And I just said, this guy's going to hit it big. And sure enough, he has. I mean,
wow.
he's
I heard he ended his contract with Netflix. I think he's moving on to Amazon now, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
he's got the freedom to do movies, but he's going to do TV shows for Amazon. But of course, the biggest thing I'm looking forward to him is his company bought the rights to the Dark Tower, the Stephen King's Dark
Oh,
Tower series. And his company has total control of that. So he can make it for any place, but probably end up at Amazon. But because he's in control of it, there's going to be no studio interference. Nobody's going to come in and say, you got to do this or you got to do that. He's in total control of it. And
That's great.
I'm looking forward to that. Oh,
I also heard
boy.
Ryan Murphy too. I think is ended his contract with Netflix, is now moving on to Prime as well. So I mean, I guess we're gonna get a lot of good content soon.
Yeah. Man,
Wow.
well, Netflix has been, people are leaving Netflix, but they've got people coming in too. I mean, I've got Zack Snyder working at Netflix for the foreseeable future, creating worlds there. And of course, I was thinking of Zack Snyder, for this because of the comic book series, The Watchmen, with the tagline, "Who watches the Watchmen?" It's kind of like, who watches over something like Lumen? Who has control of that? And if, if Egan died a while ago, who's in control of this Lumen Corporation now? Who's running it? Who's the CEO of this corporation? It's kind of like the ultimate nightmare of bureaucracy, because we actually have no idea who's in control of this.
Maybe it's an AI system that
Yeah.
also it's gonna just,
Well, speaking like of
that's our
haunted
fear, that
houses,
AI is going to control us, right? And
yeah, Richard Matheson, legendary horror writer of the 20th
I Am
century,
Legend. Sure.
1960s, 70s, 80s, I Am Legend, Incredible Shrinking Man, a lot of classic Twilight Zone episodes, Nightmare at 30,000 feet or 20,000 feet, with William Shatner in the original Twilight Zone. He wrote a haunted house novel called Hell House, where it turns out that the Hell House and the hauntings are all generated by this super machine that had ingrained the personality of the guy that built the house. So I can't help but wonder, if you dig into Lumen far enough, if you'll find that Keir Egan is now kind of like a machine. He's a living machine now. That
Was
he's
that
in.
Matheson's story the inspiration for that movie Demon Seed, David? Do you know? They're similar, right?
Yeah, if I've read
It's been a
Demon
long
Seed,
time
it was
since I
a
saw Demon
long,
Seed.
long time
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
It could be. I mean, Matheson
Yeah.
was tremendously influential. He's, along with
Yeah.
H.P. Lovecraft, Richard Matheson is cited by Stephen King as one of his main inspirations.
Right.
Salem's Lot was directly inspired by I Am Legend, as was, of course, George Romero's legendary movie, Night of the Living Dead, was really inspired in large measure by I Am Legend.
Mhm.
You know, and most folks here probably are familiar with the Will Smith version of I Am Legend.
I like Omega Man personally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, none of them have come completely close to what it was, but I mean that's understandable. The
No.
way Richard Matheson wrote that in the mid 20th century simply would not work in the 21st century, because it features a character who attempts to learn how to cure the vampire plague himself. But this was written in the 1950s, when you could actually gain enough knowledge, educate yourself on that to be believable. But 21st century, somebody trying to learn, a former soldier trying to learn medicine on their own would be like, yeah, right. Because there's so many different levels to it. So having Robert Neville as a scientist already was actually a clever choice for that. And I like how, kind of Severance dates back to that old Gothic tradition. Instead of a haunted castle or a haunted wilderness or a haunted house or a haunted car like Stephen King's Christine, or a haunted computer, we have a haunted corporation, perhaps. This empty building where reality is checked at the door, and all kinds of horrors lurk behind the pristine white halls of Lumen. They'll even kill you if you start to get out of control. That one security guy, the guy it was perfectly cast. I mean, this guy looks like a badass. I mean, he's like muscular. He's just like, yeah.
But I
And of
think
will
course,
there's
say,
always been
oh,
a
go ahead.
fascination with the house, the haunted house, or the house
yeah,
that it may be alive. Because I was remembering in the Fall of the House of Usher, in the story, the house at the beginning of the story is described as almost like watching the narrator and
mhm,
having a personality. So the idea that the house is the person occupying the house is the house, or the house is the
yeah,
person. Like A Rose for Emily by Faulkner is also like that. The
yeah,
house, the woman who lives in the house becomes kind of, or they kind of merge into each other. And I was just going to
mhm,
mention, because I never thought of this, but my only horror story that I wrote and published had to do with a person who, there was this guy who merged with his own house, and then it started eating people. And so I'm trying to remember the name of it, but yeah, this is basic. I think I like psychoanalysis. So
mhm,
Freud said that it's the uncanny. It's where a familiar object
yeah,
becomes off.
frightening.
Something
Yeah,
starts being off about it, and just like that with, I mean, Lumen is just a building, and then things start to be off there and
yeah,
inside and outside. I mean, even the outside is kind of sinister because it's all full of light, and it looks just like a building with a parking lot. But then it's then when you look at it from perspective, like a larger perspective, it almost like it dominates the town, and
and
it's surrounded by dark mountains. But it's just,
it's an
in the end,
inner
it's very
me.
uncanny.
It's an
And it's
inner
sort of this
me.
massive monolithic structure, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we see them
yeah,
around, right? Like a big warehouse type of thing with a big parking
mhm,
lot, and they're so familiar to us, but
mm,
we kind of picture them having a will of their own, right? And we avoid them at
yeah,
night, those big parking lots.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's, even though if they're well lit, it's like this idea of just
Theory, right?
being alone in this huge space.
Yeah.
And of course, I
Yeah.
just thought of it, that's the you know uh kind of wonder if that's was deliberate by Lumen, that you have this big, large space, and everybody's kind of, because it's so large, the four people there just even if their desks weren't set together, they might cluster together because of just the vast open spaces that, are unfolding there.
What's the opposite of claustrophobia? Like, I mean, I know agoraphobia, which is fear of the outside, but what about the fear of big spaces? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm
Is there
actually, I'm
a
not,
term for
I'm
it?
not,
Good
I'm sure
question.
there's a specific name
Mhm.
Must
for
be a
it.
word.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what it would be, but I think maybe that a lot of times that would probably be subsumed under agoraphobia, just the fear of the outside. But there's probably something specific that,
I have to look that up.
yeah, well, I'm grabbing my Kindle and let's see if I can do a quick search here. We'll go with, let's see, fear of open spaces. So we can kind of get a definition.
I came up with agoraphobia, but
Agoraphobia.
that's
Yeah, comes up.
Yeah,
Agoraphobia comes
yeah,
up.
that's probably
Mhm.
it. Yeah, because that's going to be subsumed with
oh,
the outside. Uh, uh, yeah, that fear of
interesting. There's a phobia that I just discovered called koinonophobia. It's fear of rooms or people in rooms. I guess
Oh,
it's more like
wow.
fear of parties or people who don't like
Right.
being in
Right.
rooms. A lot of people.
Yep, definitely all just agoraphobia. Okay. You never
Well,
know. There's
I was gonna come back to like this notion, like so if there was like something diabolic, right? You mentioned hell and helly before, but something that strikes me about the show and the authorities that are controlling it, they don't seem to be
universe.
supernaturally inspired or wise, right? Like the entire construction has many flaws, right? It's shoddy, right? The construction is
Yeah.
shoddy. The surveillance system is not working, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have
Yeah.
all of these problems with the people that are there. And
Won't
really,
be
it
able to
reminds me a
plot
lot
and
more.
scheme about what,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, to me, it's not sort of some sort of supernatural evil would be very implausible. To me, it's more like Hannah Arendt, the banality of the
Yeah.
entire affair, right? The absurdity of it
Yeah.
is that the value of human life is reduced to, right, these
And
rather shoddy and banal tasks, right, which they don't even understand, right, that have nothing to do with sort of edification or sort of finding any value or purpose to your life. And I mean, that's kind of like I'd be surprised if it went in a supernatural direction. So I hope that
yeah,
doesn't happen because
Yeah,
they're
it
kind of
it,
hasn't
ruining
yet.
it for me,
it
right?
probably,
It's
yeah.
it
just
probably, it probably won't. And I think most of it'll, if whatever needs to be explained, will be done through the workings of the computer. Although it's still firmly, it still has a firm basis in horror. It's the of course, that also goes back to one of the oldest themes in science fiction and horror, going all the way back to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. We can play God. Dr. Frankenstein can create a monster, give the monster life, but we aren't God. Frankenstein sees his creation, he's terrified of it, he runs off, and he abandons his creation to develop as it will, and it ends up becoming a monster. If he had stayed with the monster, perhaps the monster would have turned out differently. So the Lumen Corporation is like a corporate Dr. Frankenstein. Perhaps it creates this, tries to create this highly controlled, regimented environment, playing God, creating new personalities, new people. I mean, literally,
A
the
new
Lumen
religion.
Corporation
Yeah.
that's a
plays
nice
God.
idea for a comedy, though. Steve, that I mean, David, I was thinking that maybe it would be interesting to see a movie or a book about if the monster had been treated nicer and he actually had become a successful individual, you know, with a job and with a family.
Yeah.
Somebody should make that movie. That
Yeah.
Well, I get you might point out to Young Frankenstein, I guess, might fill that, where the monster in Young Frankenstein actually isn't abandoned. And of
oh,
course,
okay.
Yeah.
and the bride that's created in the Young Frankenstein doesn't reject the monster like it does in the classic Bride of Frankenstein. But much like Dr. Frankenstein, you know, or other times where humans want to play God, Lumen can try to play God and even create personalities, but it's not God. There's just some things that it can't control. You know, kind of like Jurassic Park. You can try to control everything, but one thing goes wrong and pff, it all falls apart.
Yeah. And
But
right,
it's like the
it's also a
original
message.
sin.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, somebody mentioned recently, I'm trying to remember the conversation, but somebody was talking about the original sin. Like in an infinity of time, it will always happen. You'll always eat the apple, right? If
Yeah.
something can go wrong, eventually will go wrong. Like nothing can remain perfect forever. But
Yeah, the game is rigged, right, in the Old Testament.
Or or in order for the redemptions of humans to take place, perhaps the fall of humanity needed to take place in order for there to be free will. You know,
yeah,
because you
I always had a hard time with that concept of free will
Yeah.
in the
And the
Old
idea that
Testament.
you're
But
going to be punished for eating from the tree of knowledge is
yeah.
there's a fundamental problem of that built baked
Well,
into the cake. But yeah.
and of course that goes to some of the interesting um, contradictions within the Old Testament. For example, like in the book of Job, the devil and God seem to be like cooperating together,
they
which
always
is
seem to be.
kind
I
of like
mean,
odd, you know.
isn't the devil doing God's work by,
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
right.
it's still
God,
like
the
this
devil
a
is the servant of
paradox.
God, right? Sure.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, we're going into a different direction now.
Well, well, are we really considering like Kier Egan is essentially the
Yeah.
god of the Lumen Corporation? I
Yeah.
mean, they live
So who's the devil?
yeah, the rebellious workers, or the
Yeah, the
whoever the
workers.
guy was that wrote the Rickon, I think it is. Isn't he the one that wrote the book about trying to expose Lumen within Severance? Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
would the
The
devil?
brother-in-law.
Yeah, the devil be considered the guy that wrote the book that was anti-lumen and is discovered by Dylan inside his desk? Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
generating the origin of the rebellion that
Yeah.
takes
What is
place.
his and he seems so benign and kind of,
And it's so
not this
absurd,
good
right? It's
character.
just this kind of self-help pablum, right? Like
Yeah,
it's mealy mouthed. It's not good advice, right? But yet, right, it becomes this revolutionary tract, right, in the context
yeah.
of the story, right? I think that's pretty hilarious. Right. Yeah.
But I
Well,
have a theory about who the actual God is, and it will show up in the second season. It will be Ben Stiller will show up.
yeah, that could,
I want to believe that he will be
yeah,
in it.
that could be.
I want him to
I
show
mean,
up. Yeah.
he's directed most of the episodes, so yeah, that's imminently imminently possible. The uh, Ben Stiller will show up at some point. I mean, after all, it looked like at the end of the season that the Christopher Walken character had been written off, although that doesn't necessarily have to last. But of course, Christopher Walken is pretty far up there in years. Still a damn good actor, though. I'm looking forward to seeing him playing the Emperor in Dune Part 2.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as
Nice.
I saw Christopher Walken there, it's like, oh yeah, I'm down for this. Christopher Walken's in this. Oh hell yeah, definitely.
Oh, is he going to be Harkonnen?
Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I'm thinking in Christopher Walken's going to be like the Emperor of the Galaxy. So I don't think he'll be coming from House Harkonnen.
Okay.
Well, what I always liked about Christopher Walken was that he has a sense of humor no matter what he plays, right? He always has a little
Yeah.
touch of, a little smirk, a little something
Yeah.
is always funny to him.
Well, and it's he's kind of familiar with this role of having a double personality. Since he was the actor who played in the movie adaptation of Stephen King's Dead Zone, where the character Johnny is in a coma for 7 years, and he wakes up with the ability to see the future. So the person he wakes up as 7 years later is fundamentally different from who he was, you know, 7 years before the accident that ends up giving him this ability to see into the future when he touches somebody.
I
So
haven't seen that movie, but it sounds. How long ago was the movie made? Was he in his younger?
this would have been early 80s. The Dead Zone was made before Stephen King, before Maximum Overdrive, which was 1986. So probably I think maybe 1981. I'm taking a stab at it. I don't remember the exact year. 1981, 1982, maybe.
Okay. So must have been pretty young.
Yeah. I I think I might be wrong, but I think The Dead Zone was directed by David Cronenberg. Um, yeah, no, yeah, I think it was. I think the Dead Zone was directed by David Cronenberg. Yeah, of course there's a great you know creative voice there, David Cronenberg. Whoo,
Of course. Sure.
and his son
Absolutely.
Brandon Cronenberg, and of course a lot of Cronenberg's movies also kind of have a lot to do with the idea of identity and the maintenance or loss of it. And uh, some of his work, of course, deals with body horror, the alteration or transforming of the body, like David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, which is just like, whew, one of the rare remakes that literally blows away the original.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's one of the nice things about Severance is that it has roots in the comedy genre, like an obvious parallel to that would be the sitcom The Office. It has long-running themes in the horror genre, the loss of identity, being trapped someplace you can't escape from, a dual personality, and science fiction where technology is controlling everything about our lives.
I
I
wonder
mean,
if there will be a new horror genre. There will be AI horror because
oh, that's already being done. There's a lot of
but I wonder if this would qualify in a way because I mean it's not exactly AI, but
well, we don't know where that's going to come in. I have trouble believing that at some point Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller aren't going to bring in AI for Severance in a future season.
I
It
mean
seems
it
like a
seems like
natural
yeah,
storyline,
yeah.
especially when AI was, in part responsible for the longest Hollywood strike in almost 60 years. It was the first time since like I think the 1960s since both the actors and writers were on strike at the same time. And a lot of the issue was, that actors and writers wanted to make sure that AI didn't take over their jobs.
And there are
And
already existing works that just
yeah,
take their texts and modify them and reuse them.
yeah. Although
It is a
like I said,
concern for writers, of course.
well, and then of course the chances of that happening are somewhat lessened now with the with the agreements, but also there was a court ruling that said any story generated by AI or movie created with AI was not subject to copyright. So if somebody writes an AI story, it instantly goes into the public domain. Or if somebody uses a computer to generate an original story that they don't input themselves, it instantly goes into the public domain, which means anybody could do it. Kind of like what happened with George Romero in Night of the Living Dead, when the company forgot to put a trademark on the new title page. As soon as it came out, it went into the public domain. I had an intriguing philosophical question about that, or practical question. Let's say somebody did a Superman story with AI that was released as a movie from Warner Brothers. Does that mean that the character of Superman is suddenly in the public domain?
Suddenly becomes.
Yeah, I mean,
I thought Superman actually did become
I
public
think he
domain,
is in
but
the public domain anyway. Yeah.
coincidentally, I mean,
So is Batman.
for different
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah, although I don't think I'm going to go off and make a Superman movie, because I still have a feeling if I did, Warner Brothers is going to have some lawyers contacting me and lay the smacketh down my Rudy Poo candy ass, to quote
Yeah.
The Rock. But I think we're getting to the end of the time that I had set for the Zoom session. So I think we've covered almost everything about Severance pretty well. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you're from one of my classes, don't forget to either email me or put it on Blackboard message that you attended to get the extra credit. And thank you,
Thanks, David, for inviting us to be part of it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David.
Well,
It's fun to be here with all of you.
Could I add a
thank you,
quick
Robin,
note also, just in case for anyone who hasn't watched it yet, there was also a lot of promotion that was done for it before it had come out. They put a companion kind of ebook or letter.
wow.
I think it was called the Lexington Letter. It was up
Wow,
on LinkedIn. I'm
cool.
sure you all can kind of access it. It's a separate story, but it's within the world of
Nice.
I didn't
Lumen.
know about it.
Yes, it's called the Lexington
Interesting.
Letter. It came out on LinkedIn. So if you have a LinkedIn,
Wow.
it's the actual page for
That's
Lumen
creepy.
corporations with
That you have
employees.
to be.
So
Oh, it's
as
cool.
you go in there,
Oh my
you'll
God.
see like feedback and comments. People will say how great Lumen is, and there will be
Nice.
actual employees will say that. But there are cryptic messages as well on LinkedIn of certain employees saying certain things like, "Have you seen Ted? I haven't seen Ted." And there'll be little things of other characters from other parts of the state that are in Lumen. So for this particular one, I believe the Lexington Letter, it takes place, I don't know where, but it was another state, and it's a completely different Lumen corporation
That's
facility.
interesting.
And if you look at it, she's actually able to get letters out to her Audi, and her Audi is trying to find
Nice.
someone to help the
It's
inmate.
fascinating.
If you
We'll have
can
to check
look
it
it
out.
up, it's called the
that
Lexington Letter. It's a PDF.
that
I think it's about 20 some pages. It's good.
that
The
really
companion piece to the
does
show.
that. Thank
Thanks,
you for
Sylvia.
saying that, because that means Severance really did draw inspiration from storytelling on social media like YouTube, because there's this entire genre that's kind of been created around what they would call viral marketing, called unfiction. It's called unfiction because it's not nonfiction, but it's also not completely fiction. You don't know if it's fiction or real, thus the term unfiction. And it's storytelling that blurs the line of reality between whether it's really taking place or not. It's really a fascinating set of storylines. It can be, a lot of the stories that are told are horror, but there's a lot of mystery to it. And the very fact that they did the Lexington Letter, yeah, they the creators of Severance definitely drew inspiration from online storytelling. Absolutely, I know that 100% for sure now.
I just
Which is
looked it up. It says, yes, you can download it through Apple Books for free,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so
in case
it's
anyone's interested.
that's
Excellent.
really nice to know. And someday I'll have to do some presentations on unfiction, because it's
Interesting.
uh,
Yeah.
it's a fascinating genre.
Yeah.
It can delve into psychological issues. Like, there was a therapist who created this story about a woman who was being depressed, called "Hi, I'm Mary Mary," all one word. And the entire series is chronicling this interior conflict of this young woman until it eventually reaches a resolution. Yeah, I think there's one
Check
called
it out.
I Am Sylvie, but I might have that title wrong. It kind of like plays around with the concept of AI and what's real. That we're introduced to this young woman who's all rich and powerful and really, really annoying, but it's kind of like has the same tone of Severance. First, it's comedy, and then eventually, as it goes along, it becomes more and more horrific. Yeah, and the woman that we're finding was so annoying at the beginning is actually a victim. It's a really interesting series, but I just don't have the title in front of me at the moment, and can't conjure the title image from my mind right off the bat. But that'll be a topic of future discussion. So yeah, maybe next semester we can either do Mike
But we have plenty
Flanagan,
of topics. We can continue
or
Oh yeah. Sure.
conversations.
or we could do like horror and humor within the within superhero the superhero genre, with like looking at The Boys or Invincible on
Sure.
Prime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
means, okay, got to get to work watching The Boys then. I watched some of the first season, but I'm going to have to start watching that now so I can actually talk about it in a sensible way. Although I have
Probably
read
have.
the entire comic book series, so I
Oh,
could.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Okay.
Hope you
Well,
all
it was nice to
Yeah.
talk to all of
Good
you.
to be with everybody. Good to talk to you
Yes.
all.
Yeah, and we'll see you again hopefully next semester.
Of course.
Yes,
Have a good
definitely.
weekend.
Have a
Yep,
good one.
everybody have a great weekend and
Bye.
happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Bye.
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 Bye.